started. Thanks for coming here. I'm Alison, Cundiff, James Patterson. So who can tell me if anyone knows when the learning model was initiated on campus? Anyone know?
Initiated on campus?
Yeah.
Probably a year after, 6 months from the president. Is that right?
Yeah, I know. Brother Brad had kind of set that up. So it was fall of 2007. So I was a student here from 2004 to 2008, and that was a time of lots of changes. So fall 2005, President Clark came because Elder Bednar got called to be an apostle. I was here for the groundbreaking, the construction, open house, and dedication of the temple. We had the learning model initiated in fall of 2007, and we now know that the seeds were being sown for this amazing work that we're all a part of now, online learning. And so before the learning model was initiated on campus, from a student perspective, the principle that they taught us to employ in our learning was this: learning by study and also by faith. And it comes from Doctrine and Covenants. And this was kind of what we, before the learning model was in its current form, what we were taught as students to think about. Study, do all you can to learn your material, and then have faith, pray that you'll learn the principles that you need to learn. So in President Clark's inaugural response, he said this quote. Can I ask one of you read it?
Now there is a great spirit of learning on this campus and much learning by faith. Our challenge is to take that spirit deeper to make learning by faith a pervasive, everyday reality. This will require much of our students, but it also will require much of the faculty and staff. Indeed, it will require new ways of learning and teaching based on inspired scholarship.
Thank you. So it really was, like President Clark says here, it was pervasive. I, as a student, understood that learning by study and also by faith was something that I was expected to do, and also I believe that the teachers and the faculty as well incorporated that into their teaching. So I believe that President Clark could see the learning model in his mind when he gave this inaugural response, because he also said this. So can I have someone else read this quote?
To learn by faith, students need opportunities to take action. Some of those opportunities will come in the classroom, where prepared students exercising faith step out beyond the light they already possess to speak, to contribute, and to teach one another.
Great, thank you. So that brings us where we are kind of today with this learning model. And Brother Broadhead really kind of set this up well in explaining from his side, the admin side, of how the learning model was created. But we have an inspired learning model that now thousands upon thousands more students than ever before are being able to take part of, and more faculty, us as faculty, are able to take a part of this as well. So how can we as online instructors make sure that this inspired learning model and these principles are used in particularly our discussion boards, but in our online classes as well? So today James and I are going to give you a tool that will help you do that. And so, yeah, James.
I'm so grateful for Alison and for her personal experience with the learning model and the importance of it. She has a testimony, I guess you could say, of that, and I'm grateful for her being able to share that. Not something that I had before I began working for BYU-Idaho. In honor of the Women's World Cup, I was inspired to use a little bit of a soccer analogy as we start talking about what's happening on our discussion boards. And I don't know all of your experiences, but I visit enough classrooms and I talk to enough instructors that I think most of us have some sort of a frustration with discussion boards. And the fact that you're in one of, I think, 4 or 5 seminars on discussion boards means that you've sensed something. Part of the problem, I think, as I begin to think about what's going on and not going on my discussion boards, is that we have goals as instructors. We're on one team, and our students have goals for the discussion boards. They're perhaps on another team, and lots of times those goals aren't the same. If you think about what we're doing, what are your students' goals for the discussion board? Right? Get in, make your initial post, your 3 replies, and get out. Right? That's fairly standard on a lot of discussion boards.
I have friends who that's why they stopped doing the BYU program. It's because of the discussion board. They're older. The discussion board didn't meet any of their, it just seemed like busy work for them. And so improving that would help people that would help retention.
Right, it kind of perpetuates itself. They don't really want to get in there and teach one another. Or if they do, they just don't feel like they have the time or whatever. And then the discussion board becomes not very meaningful because nobody's really giving anything that's worthwhile. What are our purposes for the discussion board? What's our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? If we're honest, I think there are good ones, and then yes.
Well, for me, that's a great way for me to strengthen my relationship with my students as individuals, because I get to know them better. I can share part of myself with them and connect with them on a spiritual level, an academic level, lots of different ways.
Good. So we're going to talk about several purposes, but there's always that purpose, right? We can always to teach one another that we're trying to get them to do, and then building relationships with them is always something that we can do, no matter how bad that discussion board gets. Yes.
And building that community, I do see happen. I do see that it works because people share stories on that discussion board, and that opens it up for others, including myself, to take part in that. But it also helps deepen learning application.
Good.
You may have read something in an essay, but then when they share their story or think deeper about it, other people start thinking about the material in a new way as well.
Good. Good. Yes.
Well, I do English 106, and in our discussion boards, the readings that they're doing, they're actually analyzing writing techniques and strategies, and then seeing how they can apply that to their own writing,
Good.
and if it's effective or not.
Good. So there's actually a useful purpose, and we can think about specific purposes for the discussion boards. I think a lot of times, though, when we look at our discussion boards, it's like 5-year-old AYSO soccer, where they don't even know why they're kicking the ball. They're just kicking the ball and huddled around it and clustering around the first response that got posted, and then the later people never get anything. And so we want to get away from this.
Herding cats.
What's that?
Herding cats.
Exactly. It's very similar to that. We've got to, the only way to do it really is as a player coach. We have to be in there and involved. I know there's some debate, and I've actually tried different things in my discussion boards of not participating as much, hoping that the students will pick up the slack and really participate among themselves. And then really participating a lot, but I worry, am I taking over the discussion, and I'm the only one driving it. I've come to not fear that second thing so much. I think the more that I'm in there, the more I'm able to actually kick some passes, to use my analogy some more, to direct the game, to get them headed towards the same goal. And then the question is, what is our goal? What should we be looking at? And there are a couple things that changed the way that I view discussion boards for me. One of them, obviously, teaching one another. As I said, our overriding purpose always is striving for those deeper discussions and that deeper learning, as you said, and helping them to teach one another, hopefully to make those connections. I think that if we will take the time before our discussion boards, it takes some extra time, because sometimes, and I wanted to mention this, if we're honest with ourselves, there are weeks, if I'm honest with myself, I shouldn't condemn all of you. If I'm honest with myself, there are some weeks where I participated in my discussion board because I knew that my teacher would be coming in there and be looking to see if I had posted anything on my discussion board. I'm like, oh, that's not good. That's not why I want to be in there. If I stop and think about the purposes, Joel, our director, I am not alone. Thank you for not leaving me hanging. Has also done that, because you're like, I got to get in there and make some posts. But really, if we can stop, we can just take a second, step back, say a prayer, and then start to think about purposes. And there are several different levels of purposes that we can think about. So think right now, take a moment, look at these questions. You have them on your handout as well. And think about, what is the purpose or goal for this course? And then how could that be reinforced through discussion boards? We have course-wide goals. What's the purpose or goal for this week? Does your course go week by week and there's a focus for that week? I've taught a course for a long time, but that's the way it is. It makes it very nice. What's the purpose or goal for this discussion board? So hopefully you've got some prompts that are there, and you can kind of see well, I won't say this. We looked in a couple of courses. We were hoping there is a place in your course to show like learning outcomes. If course development filled that out, and they haven't always, I've learned, you can go there and kind of look at some course outcomes. But we can also generally figure out what they're trying to do with this discussion board. And we'll talk in a minute about what to do if that's not super obvious. What purpose or goal do I feel inspired to pursue this week? And then, is there a purpose or goal with each student, which gets to an individual level, and then all of a sudden you're saying, I don't have time to do that each time with each student, but you kind of do. Sometimes you can see a student and you can say, here's something that I could do for this particular student. Early in my course, there were 2 discussion boards each week. And in order for me to keep them straight, I would write down the purpose of the discussion board. And for my course, one week it might be so that they understand inductive logic or bias or fallacies. And I would write that down next to my computer so that I always remembered what it is that we were trying to do in that board. And I could keep directing the 5-year-old soccer game back towards that particular purpose. So again, as we said, somebody said, we always, if you're having trouble coming up with a purpose, hopefully you thought of some that could work, that you could think of ahead of time on your discussion boards that would help you to stay more focused. Even if you can't, there's always that building relationships with students and trying to connect them to each other, which is something I do frequently. I will ask them, I'll say, Joe up above made this comment. Will you take a look at that and see, are you guys saying the same thing or are you saying something different? And try to connect them on the discussion board to direct them towards each other. But the other thing that I do, in addition to writing down this purpose, is I have categories of questions that are hopefully getting me back to the purpose. Because here's my problem. Once I know and identify what the purpose is on my discussion board, my natural inclination is to start preaching to them about that purpose. So they'll make a post and I'll say, oh, but we're talking about bias. Remember, we're talking about bias today, and bias is this. You did a really good job showing me bias, and then I'm out. But I haven't done anything really to deepen their experience and to help them learn. I found that if and again, I have to write things down, and so I have the wall next to my computer just covered with stuff like this. But one of them is these categories of questions that are at the bottom of your handout. I literally have this taped, it's actually on my desk this semester, of these types of questions. So I have found that I can't come up with necessarily specific questions, although I do save some questions from semester to semester because I've taught the course for a while. But these general categories help me to come up with questions. If I can say, if I look at a post, because a lot of times I would find I was looking at a post and thinking, I can't think of a question. I can't think of any way to extend this. It's really not a super deep response from a student. And I couldn't think of any questions. But if I look through these categories, I can always find a question to ask. It has helped me immensely to be able to do that. And this came from an article called Are You Asking, actually, I think it was You're Asking the Wrong Question. We have on the back of your handout, I think, there's a link to that article. Really short article, but it's just about making sure that we're asking purpose-driven questions. That we think about the purpose and come up with a question. And for me, these categories of questions help me to do that. And so if you'll use those, it will, I promise you, you'll begin to see better questions. I'm just going to give you one example really fast, and this is really long. I wanted to find a shorter one. But what happened here, the student, we were discussing whether or not it's okay for Mormon farmers to grow barley for beer. That was the discussion board for that week. And the student argued that beer is not technically against the word of wisdom. If you go back and look at section 89, it says grain, it actually says barley, like barley, you can drink barley, which is what they make beer out of. So that was her argument. She's like, it's okay for them to grow barley for beer because well, beer is okay. So then I had some clarifying to do. I wanted to be sure here. And if you look at the categories of questions, I wanted to define and explain. I wanted to define the word of wisdom, and we've got some extra information since section 89 came out. And then I wanted to make sure that I also challenged her that there was a question. So I asked, if modern day prophets have told us not to drink beer, is it still morally acceptable? In other words, does that change your premise here? And then she came back, what I loved is she came back and said, yeah, you're right. Well, I didn't love that. No, I do love that. You're right. But then she said, but they haven't participation in the process of making beer, which is good. So then she's starting to think at the next level. So by challenging her, that last category of questions, I was able to not just clarify, which is part of my responsibility as a teacher on that discussion board, but also to be able to get her to think a little bit deeper. And then we were able to go on, and some other people joined in. That thread actually ended up being pretty good. And I, taking some credit, I think it's because I did this extra part. If I hadn't done that, and I normally would have just stopped right there, but by thinking of questions, we went the next step.
What's the outcome of this discussion board that you were looking for? The higher learning, or to get them to agree to live the word of wisdom?
Yeah, it was not the word of wisdom. So that was a tangent that normally I wouldn't do, and that's why I've got outside sources. And this is much longer than a normal post for me, because that was a tangent. It wasn't to explain the word of wisdom. But it just happened that I felt like, well, I can't very well leave this on a discussion board and not say something. Somebody will be like, whoa, beer's okay. It's not just Mountain Dew at BYU now. We can drink
But I
here at
think it's
BYU-Idaho.
awesome that you recognized it as an opportunity to make an exciting discussion, and that's exactly what happened. And so you put your effort in that student's response, hoping everybody else would engage like that student did, and I bet it was awesome.
Yeah, it
And
takes
isn't
off.
that the purpose?
Yeah, and by having those categories, I was again able to, I don't want to take too much credit, able to just focus on what I needed to do. Amy?
But something that happened from your questioning, she raises some questions, and I've had a few other teachers say that they've had their students raise questions that are much more powerful and that
Yep.
get the group going, but her questions that she raises are really, I mean, it seems like it goes right in line with the course that you were teaching, you know, that she kind of pinpoints, well, what about this? I mean,
Right.
are we gonna get really?
She's extending the context. She's now asking me some of my categories of questions, extending the context where we can explore and talk about why it's not the same and why those analogies may be false
You're
analogies.
getting higher levels of learning from that. That's the highest level of Bloom's right there.
Rebecca?
So I have a question for you. At times when I'm having a discussion with my students and I have a discussion like this with the student, other students feel bad jumping into my conversation, and I'm like, no, obviously I want them to. So how do you make sure that the students know this is open to all?
Yeah, I wish I could show you, and I had a bunch of examples and it was just too much, and in fact, I'm taking Alison's second. I usually write here, and it's not here in this one, and I'm kind of sad that it's not. In red, I usually have something that says, everyone can jump in here, or thoughts, everyone. And I put that in red, so I ask the question to the student, but then I always, I can't say that I always, I almost always, except for the example I showed you, I almost always say, thoughts, everyone, or everyone can jump in here and try to make that. And frequently, I will have somebody else will respond first before the student, and that happens more often than not.
The subject line works.
Yeah.
I put the person's name and then all classmates.
Good.
The subject line.
I love that, Cynthia.
I know this is tangential, but with pathway students now looking at critical thinking papers, you've got them coming up with these randomly doctrinal, questionable topics that they've got to post
Right.
about, right? So they're throwing in these crazy things. My question is, as an instructor, do you jump right in with the doctrinally correct stance, or do you wait for a classmate to do that for you?
That is a tough one, and I've done it both ways. I had somebody who argued that not only the beer was okay, but that marijuana was okay, and so right.
Colorado.
I will maybe watch those for a day, but I always make sure that I make a note of it, that I don't let that one go
I mean,
more than about 24 hours. Yeah, without
so
jumping
you
in.
get a little.
Yeah, we're still the teacher, and
Yes,
there is. I feel a responsibility to make sure that there's not false doctrine being preached on my discussion board, which happens. So, all right. Just in case this doesn't, if you're looking at this and going, that's fine for you, James Patterson, but that doesn't work in my class or my type of discussion board, Alison can address that.
Yeah, so when James asked me to do this, I was really excited because I feel like in my course, the discussion boards can really improve and participation can improve and everything. And then he shows me, you know, the types of discussion boards on his course, and I'm like, wow, you know, that does not happen in my course, more because it's just not set up that way for these types of questions we ask the students. My discussion boards are more group members posting parts of their presentation that they're working on, or answering a question, just one question about an article that they were supposed to read or something like that. So where are some other places besides discussion boards where these same principles can be used? Have you guys thought of any while you're, Joel?
I teach GS 120, and some of the stuff I think I do, you know, I was thinking, dang, I don't do this in my discussion board. But I thought, actually, I do some of that in my notes being structured.
Right.
Make that a discussion board. And I have some kind of a off-topic but related to the lesson kind of discussion going on there.
Yeah, that's great. Good. Yeah.
I think in your feedback, too, sometimes I note it and say, oh, wow, this is really good. I wondered about this. Or, that was really good feedback.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the time to put it in a post, and so I get it in a full feedback.
Right.
And
That's
I've
great.
had students email me and say, oh, that was a great question.
Yeah.
We kind of
So-
go offline a little, but it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Sometimes if I have a certain topic that goes into one of the groups of the discussion board, I'll copy it and I'll post it to all the groups.
All
because
groups,
it's
yeah.
so, because it was so good. I
Yeah.
think everybody could benefit from it, but that's still discussion.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's so helpful.
Sometimes spotlight students. So
Yeah.
I'll take 3 students and spotlight them, and I'll pick if whatever they said in the discussion board that week, and I'll email it out to the students saying, this is the spotlight of the week, and here's 3 comments that, moved me by individuals. And I'll kind of keep track, so I spotlight everyone in the semester.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's great. These are great ideas. So I also thought of feedback and notes from instructor, and also just your emails, any interaction you have with students. It's important to think of the purpose behind that interaction. Most times those overarching purposes that we've discussed will be the purpose. And then think of the categories of questions that you can ask to move people to that purpose. Yes, Mike?
I teach CIT class. And my definition CIT people don't communicate. They just write code.
Right.
So what I do with our discussion boards, I always seed it every week with a seed question that I want everybody to comment on. And that tends to flow and gets a lot more discussion going than I would see otherwise.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Rebecca.
Just focusing on discussion boards I've seen, I saw this in one of my teachers' groups, and I loved it. She has one week where she asks them to share a picture, and so it changes things up. And so it went along with the principal. They're supposed to share a picture that went along with the principal. But it was fun because it changed it to be more of a visual thing, and it really changed things up, and I could see some students get more excited about that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. These are great. I love it. So we're going to do just a few practice. Thank you.
Yeah, really fast. Think of a recent discussion board, and some of you have shared some of this already, but think of it to have you apply this. Think of a recent discussion board in your course and think of the purpose. Can you think of the purpose? Because again, what I realized a while ago is that I don't approach my discussion boards this way, and I think doing it has helped me to be better. So think of, if you can think of last week's, I'm trying to think if I can think of last week's without looking at my class. Think of last week's discussion board or a recent one that you can think of, and then what was the purpose on that discussion board? And then did you stick with that purpose, or do you notice that you were not? And if anybody was to share one of the purposes from your discussion board, I would love to hear if you can think of, because one of the things in preparing this, we started looking at other classes. We supervised some other teachers, and so we had that opportunity, but discussion boards vary quite a bit. And you have some discussion boards where Mike's saying he's seeding his discussion board. It's because it hasn't really been terribly well developed, to be honest with you, from a course development standpoint. It could be developed more. And that is something that you can consider and make suggestions for improvements. Or you can do what he's doing in the meantime and seed your discussion board to get it going. Yes?
Well, one of our discussion boards is how is use of details and description within the essay. How effective was that within the essay?
So details and description, and so then they're coming in. Now, do you find with that? See, I find that interesting. They could just come in and say it was very detailed.
There's three different prompts, but they all deal with details and descriptions and how is that effective? How did you understand what this happened by the way they use the description detail?
Good. And then you can think of, with responses, how you would then make those fit into the category. One of the things that I do, and kind of that, as you mentioned, there are 3 different parts to the prompt. I have some prompts on my discussion boards that are really involved. There's like 7 steps involved before they can actually make a post. And I'm like, oh, I don't even know what you're supposed to do anymore. And so I will often go in this semester, well, the last 2 semesters I've done this all the time. Before the week opens up, I make a post. I learned this from Tori Black. It's the sandwich approach, I think. I make a post, and then they make all their posts. And in this post, I try to explain what I would like them to focus on, and it has to do with the purpose of that discussion board. Sometimes it's skip step 3, to be honest with you, or get through that and then get to the meat of this.
Or give them a format that they can do the essay, do the response, that'll make it easier for them.
Don't get so distracted in this first step that you don't get to the detail and description or whatever it is. And then after everybody, when the first deadline is, I come back in and I make a post so that I know everybody that posts after that is now late on the discussion board.
Yep.
And then I start making all my posts. And again, I learned that from Tori Black. And I think the more I'm there, just being present on the discussion board, the more they seem to participate as well.
So I forgot to mention the last part. If you're listening to this and you're just like, my course is just not set up to think about it in this way, this is an opportunity for all of us to think about the prompts from our discussion boards and see how they might be improved to encourage deeper discussion. And if they can, we can submit those ideas to our OCRs and course improvement. So that's another opportunity. So another example from my class, I teach a presentations class, and the students they do TED Talks actually, and they do it twice. So they do it once for a smaller audience, and then they improve upon it for 2 weeks. That's what they're doing right now. And then on June 20th, their second TED Talk will be due. And part of what they need to do to improve it is make their conclusion or their call to action sticky. So that just means something that will stick with the audience. It will be something tangible and measurable that the audience will remember. And so this discussion board asks, please share your sticky conclusion to your presentation from last week. So asking them to make their conclusion from last week's presentation sticky. And this was the response that the student gave. This was her example of a sticky call to action. And so it's just, I challenge you to set aside some time to think about how you can implement this practice in your business. I promise you it will make a difference. So not quite as sticky as it should be as far as a call to action to the audience. So what I'm asking you, what is the purpose of this discussion board, first of all? Any ideas in my course? Yes.
You want them to rev up, it gives them a chance to focus in on that aspect
Yeah.
of the presentation, make it incredible.
Right.
It's not really incredible.
Yeah, exactly.
You can give them, you can help them brainstorm specific things or allow them
Yeah.
to help them with personality.
Exactly. Great.
Well, then they're able to see other people's examples and realize, oh, geez, mine really falls below.
Yeah.
I can be doing a lot better.
In a
Great.
famous way.
Yeah, in a famous way. Awesome. Yeah.
Well, it's also persuasive because you're trying to get them to do something.
Yeah. Great.
So they're gonna need to learn how to use some of that technique.
Awesome. So what category could I use, category of question, could I use to expand the students? I kind of just said what the answer might be, but look at the categories and give me some ideas on what I could ask the student. Yes.
She could define and explain, because now I want to know what the practice is.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, and I'm never going to know. It's going to bother me for
Uh-huh.
long.
Okay, great. So that's awesome. Any other thoughts?
I'm curious, I'm thinking about finding common ground between two students.
Yeah.
Or comparing
Mhm.
to another student, but then to do that.
I think what you could do, from my perspective, is you could use one of them, like challenge them to support it better or explore it further, and then say, for example, I see where it could get interesting, comparing them to another student, but I think it's okay sometimes to say, for example, so-and-so up here did it really well when they said this, and make it really specific, so they're not just saying, this student is amazing and they did this and you need to improve or something. Yeah. So yeah.
I was thinking about with the challenge and support, maybe you could have them see that it may be not the best by like asking, how would you feel if you were the audience, if you were reading this as the conclusion?
Yeah.
What would you think? What would you want more? What do you want to explain, those kinds of things, or how would you change it?
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Yeah.
You could even challenge them, how do you feel this compares to the talks that you thought were most sticky in your life?
Nice. Yeah.
Ones you
Such good ideas.
What I think is cool about this, Deepening, that you can really take any one of these.
Yeah.
It's just fun different things you can do.
Yeah. That's great. Great insight.
I was just thinking you could challenge them to pick 2 or 3 things from other students' responses that they could use to meet their search rate. Just take a flight.
Yeah, like it. So this also, if this was not a discussion board and this was a feedback thing, I could be more expansive even in my feedback and asking. That's really where other areas in our course come into play with these categories of questions, and really deepening the focus and deepening the students' critical thinking and all of that. And so I think it's just really important to think about the purpose of whatever the interaction is, the discussion board, the feedback, the email, the conversation, and then think about questions that you can ask to lead students to that purpose, and make sure, like James mentioned, write it down. I think that's such a great idea. Write it down around where you work every day, each week, you can write it down, and then it will always stay top of mind. And so that is our challenge to you today, is will you do that when you go home, get back on your class for next week, and probably get caught up on this week, and think about the purposes behind what is going on in your class, behind the discussion boards particularly, and think about that. And I know that if you do, these are some quotes that I just took from President Gilbert's address yesterday that really stood out to me. And I know that if we do this, that we can, move more towards this. I love the bigger one. We're in the business of changing lives by developing the whole person. And you can see how these questions, asking students these questions can really help develop that whole person. So thank you very much for being here.